Ravenna,
Hey,
how are you?
hello.
How are you?
I'm hanging in there. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been an interesting summer so far. Um, how have you? How's everything going though? Good.
We're working. Yeah, we're
I'm gonna move this
not.
stuff.
It's great to see you again, though. But
It's
yeah,
been
we've been
past
hustling 24/7.
24/7. I can see that from your Instagram, especially virtual campaigning. That's interesting.
Right.
That
Yeah,
was like,
uncharted territory.
yeah, that definitely is. How is the virtual campaigning been going with the phone banking and all that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me. It's great to catch up.
Mhm.
And, everything our campaign has always been untraditional, like our first campaign as well. But of course, there are so many high and true tactics and techniques that are just not safe right now. I mean, for example, we hosted 40 plus house parties in 2018. We knocked on 40,000 doors. Like, it was all about face-to-face
Of
contact and
course.
folks in every capacity. So now, we suspended our field activities back in March, just to kind of focus on public health. And actually, our campaign volunteers started doing wellness checks instead. So we were still kind of like, using the collective impact, but instead of calling for votes, we were just calling to say hi and to see how folks were in. And we ended up identifying a lot of unemployment issues that way
Yeah.
too. So it helped us, make sure folks knew we were here for them. And of course, as we get closer and closer, now less than 100 days, until November, and we have primaries coming up too, we wanted to make sure that, like, we didn't lose sight of the importance of getting out the vote, the importance of really talking about these elections on the context of public health and safety, and how elections matter, especially in the context of. So we've been engaging on phone banking, good old
I
phone
love
banking.
phone banking. That's my favorite thing.
I
Campaigning.
mean, people are
Do
answering
you
the phone
phone
a lot
bank?
more.
Do you
Yeah,
like
I
to phone
love phone
bank? Yeah, it's my
banking.
favorite, especially when talking to voters and you get so different perspectives. Like,
Right.
oh, you don't know. Oh, this person went through this struggle, and and you can change people's minds, and I always enjoy it.
It's an opportunity to have an actual dialogue with someone, right? And
Yeah,
to hear how they're feeling. And yeah, it's awesome. I mean, and more people are answering the phone right now because
and
folks
that is a benefit, I guess.
don't want to talk to, right?
Yeah.
And so we've also embraced things like text banking, especially as a tool to recruit for some of our virtual events. And we've actually, at this point, have hosted at least 3 virtual events specific to our campaign. And so we just had a really great virtual house party about 2 weeks ago, maybe, that was focused on gun safety issues. We had Moms Demand Action. And what's also been kind of cool, honestly, about the virtual events is two things. One is that it's like super low barrier to access, right? Like, as long as you have some means to get into a Zoom space, like, other elements around you are no longer barriers. So that's unique. And
Yeah.
two, we're able to bring in folks from across the country. So
Country.
we had Shannon Watts join us. She's a founder of Moms Demand Action. We've had folks like Cecile Richards join us for events. So it's kind of cool to bring in some of the national names that you follow on Twitter, but you don't actually get to talk to and ask questions to. So that's been kind of cool to, break down those barriers as well. And then finally, we have restarted our literature drop. So we're not actually knocking on doors because
Yeah,
we still don't think it's safe.
of course.
But we are leaving literature at doors to let folks know that we were there. And we have a handout about COVID-19 that's specific. So we are, restarting those efforts as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, camp, especially we're all living in, I guess, history right now because it's also unique. It's also different. But then, as you said, the election is coming up. But then, how do you? I know you're trying your best. You do live as we're doing now, but by yourself. You answer your constituents' questions, and it's amazing.
Oh,
A lot of
okay.
reps don't do that, right? That's the
Right.
one. I think that's the one that you have. The availability to you is something that's unique about you. But then how is Orange, there's an election coming up. How do you make people, like, again, feel safe to vote? Well, especially
Totally.
when the president is like, don't vote by mail.
Right, right. I know. Oh, well, then the president changed his mind. It's like, actually, Florida's okay. And it's like, yeah, probably because Democrats are like completely excelling on vote by mail requests compared to Republican folks. I mean, it's so funny that our
It's
president.
ironic because in Trump's the his mailing list, it literally says vote by mail
Oh, by
option.
mail. Yeah, in Florida too. In Florida. Yeah, such a mess, such a mess. I mean, to your question though. So we just posted earlier today a little voter guide graphic
Yeah,
to
I
help
saw. Yeah, I'm
with their
voting by mail, and I saw that. I was like, oh, it's good.
Yep. So, we want to be a resource for folks, especially if you care about progressive politics. We want, I mean, candidly, as a voter guide, it's like, I'm never going to agree 100% with every person I vote for. But the folks that I put on there are folks that overwhelmingly align on the same issues and values. There's never going to be, folks that 100% agree with me, but I hope it is a good starting place, if you will, for folks to make their own decisions. And so I think part of it is just reminding folks there is an election, right? Because
Yeah.
many folks just don't remember, or don't, August 18th, especially for our young people going back to school, pandemic season, like everything just feels so weird, right? And so you might totally forget that it's even happening. And then of course we've been requesting folks to sign up for vote by mail, and you can still do it. August 8th is the last day to request a vote by mail ballot for the primary election here in Orange County. So if you're not safe, you don't feel safe voting at your polling location, you do have early voting as an option right now, and there are no lines. Things seem at least spaced out, if you will, but you can still request a vote by mail ballot up until August 8th.
That's good. That is amazing. So I'm gonna transition a little into what we talked about last time. For those who don't know, Rep Anna joined the show in April, and a lot has changed since April. Definitely a lot. So I'm gonna ask you a very, very, and I'm gonna reference some questions and some things you said in there, and then relate it back to now. I'm gonna start with a very broad question. Right, in April when you were on the show, there was around 50,000 cases in Florida. Now there's 500,000. So what in the nicest way possible, I guess.
Right.
What went wrong, essentially?
I mean, April is when the governor did, it was May 20th. It was May 20th when the governor did his infamous press conference outside Bet's Burger, I believe, in our district, with the vice president next to him, where he had his hands waving and he was like, everything's fine. Like, the media is making a big deal out of this, and just, kind of was like basically making fun of the news around the issues, and said that Florida is not like New York. And then we opened up the state too early, and here we are. We've surpassed so many different countries in their COVID-19 cases. And so, I mean, honestly, I think what it comes down to is that we opened up the state way too fast. I think that was the biggest thing. And, the decision to open up the state was not led by medical experts. It was led by big business. And I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. I'm saying that because Florida's task force, the reopening task force that the governor created, that didn't even announce the members until his first meeting, and I think they only convened 2 to 3 times. The chair of that was the Florida Chamber president. And so, in the Florida Chamber, they're big business. They don't represent small businesses. They represent their members, who are the largest corporations in the state. And so they're the ones who basically were, leading the task force. So what do you expect is going to happen? They're going to open
exactly, yeah.
Right, because for big business, like they want things to go back to normal as fast as possible for many different reasons. But unfortunately, it created a scenario where folks put their guard down. And of course, the governor has yet to put in place a mask mandate statewide. And here in Orange County, we're seeing improvements, and it has been credited to having a mask mandate. And so don't underestimate, the importance and impact of wearing a mask.
Yeah, no, do you know how many counties have, because I know Orange County is, I think, Palm Beach also did, or something like that. I don't know how many.
It's such like a hodgepodge of counties that do have mask mandates. I know Brevard doesn't, but some of the cities in Brevard do. And so that's what's so frustrating about not having a statewide mandate, is that you don't really know. You know what I mean? Like, you go into different counties, and you might live in one county but work at another. And so it definitely just puts different folks at risk.
Of course, of course. And then you mentioned that you have been very, very critical about the governor, obviously. But then at the same time, you have to work with the Republican Party, and then again, people who don't
Right.
disagree with you talked about this again, political gridlock. And then
Right.
I remember you talking about like you used to have meetings with the governor at times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or with the Republican Party, and it was fine and it worked. But then what? And then so since April, then now what happened to those meetings? Or like have you been communicating with them more, or has it gotten worse? Because this is not.
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's already been some reporting on this that the governor himself keeps a very tight knit circle around him, and hasn't even spoken to all the cabinet members. I mean, obviously there's a lot of tension between the governor and the one Democrat we have on the cabinet, but candidly, it's actually been all of the cabinet members, Republicans included, that apparently, just based on what we're reading in the news stories, they don't have access to the governor as much as you would expect. Now, we've been in communication with all of his staff. I talk to the agencies every day. So whether it's DPPR, which is the agency that really oversees business licenses and trying to support our bars and breweries right now through DPPR, and trying to get some pathway of relief and eventually allowing our bars and breweries to open again, because they are struggling right now. And it doesn't make sense that restaurants with bars can continue to serve, but bars that just have alcohol can't, especially our breweries are so family friendly, like they just are suffering right now. We talk to ACA all the time. ACA is the agency that oversees Medicaid and oversees our assisted living facilities. So we're talking to them. We talk to DO obviously all the time, which is still a mess. And of course, we're in communication with Department of Health every single day. So the good news is that, relationships between Democratic lawmakers and executive agencies remains open and strong, and we're constantly in conversation. But when it comes to the governor himself and his willingness to work across the aisle, his willingness to listen to different perspectives, I think it really just varies on the topic. And, most recently, he went on a Miami news station and admitted that the unemployment website was built not to work. And I just saw that Rick Scott was, asked to respond, and he said that, some politicians pit blame versus take responsibility. I mean, it's like so much drama between the two of them. And so it's interesting to watch everything, but at the end of the day, like he is just so focused on not being wrong that a lot of people suffer as a result. Because if he could just say, for example, the unemployment system is broken, here's what we're going to do to fix it. And here's what you need to know. Like, that alone would be a game changer, because if not, like, we are dealing with situations case by case, and it's like you have the power to system, and you're not. And so, like, you can systematically improve everything if you wanted to, and instead you're just ignoring the problems.
That is fair. That is fair. The governor has been doing a lot of interesting things. But the one thing that is, I hear from, at least from the Republican Party, at least from Florida, is the fact, the value of business and the value of industry, especially in places like Orange County, where this is a tourist city, right? Business thrive here. So what are you doing, or like at least the house or something, to help alleviate business, like not big businesses, but small businesses, local.
Our small business, yeah, absolutely. So a few things. I mean, I think the best thing we can all do is just keep trying to shop local, right? Like, if you have the means to spend money, shop local, go to our small businesses, go to our boutiques, get some ice cream, down the street, like, try to support our small business however you can. Because even those that are open back up, they're seeing a lot less customers. They don't have in dining like they used to. And so, definitely, continue to shop local if you can. When it comes to larger relief efforts, so one of our biggest issues these past few months, I would say, have been really trying to support our bars and breweries and pubs here in Central Florida. District 47, where I serve, we're home to over 13 breweries. We are like the craft capital of Orlando. And so it's so important that our breweries are going to survive this, and our bars are going to survive this. And there is no relief for them. You know, PPP was great for about 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And bridge loan program that the governor announced back in about, you know, March. April. He only had $50 million to it, and only 1,000 businesses even qualified for it. 38,000 applied, and they haven't seen any new relief programs. And what's worse is that they still have to pay rent, they still have to pay utilities, insurance. You know, like none of their fees have stopped. I mean, some deadlines have been extended, but nothing to the extent where they're going to be able to survive operating at a level of closure where all they can do is to-go drinks, right? And again, what's frustrating is that, you know, if you have food, then you can maintain. And you know, meanwhile, we've opened up theme parks, we've opened up so many other things, and yet they can't. So that's another one of our biggest issues. That actually, maybe just like 20 minutes ago, we posted a letter that we sent to our congressional delegation. As a reminder for folks watching, I'm a state house representative. So, you know, I function in the context of our state legislature. We're a part-time legislature, so we're not in Tallahassee right now, though I have requested to go back for a special session. And so I'm not your member of Congress. You know, I don't go to DC. Yeah. And so we sent a letter to our congressional delegation, which is essentially every member of Congress in Florida and our 2 U.S. senators, requesting that they support the Save Our Stages Act, which would create a program within the Small Business Administration, SBA, to support our independent live audience venues to get relief as well. And, you know, whether you're an artist or a stagehand or, you know, someone who does bookings, event production, like, you are one of the groups hardest hit by this pandemic. And so we're proud to send that letter of support. And last week I was doing Feed the Need, which was a volunteer-driven effort over at the Plaza Live to actually feed our artists and those impacted in the arts community, and actually anyone. We fed anyone who drove up, we gave them food. But it's just to further shine a light on how folks are still really struggling right now. And especially for those in the events industry and tourism industry, like you said, it's going to be a very long path to recovery.
Of course it is. I want to move on to talking about what we majorly talked about in the last episode, which is, again, close to my heart, is education. Schools are opening up. Yeah. I talked to a school board member, Angie. I think she knew you.
Gallo.
Yeah, Angie Gallo. Yeah. I became a little bit familiar about like what Orange County is doing to open up, but I want to get your perspective on that, because what I know is that they're doing online optional, where it's like you have kids.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because, right, childcare is obviously expensive. There's parents who can't keep their kids at home all the time. So what are your thoughts on that?
So we have been watching, you know, the school board decisions and the state of Florida's Department of Education very closely. And, you know, for folks who follow us on Instagram, you know that we've been, you know, giving updates. And unfortunately, maybe about 4 weeks ago, the state of Florida Department of Education put out an emergency order, basically saying that schools need to reopen brick and mortar in August, right? And they kept saying that there was local authority, and there really isn't. I mean, the order does give privy that if your local director of health, if at the county level your director of health were to say it wasn't safe to open up schools, then you would have more local control. But then we heard from a South Florida director of health that they were told by Tallahassee not to say anything. And so, you know, creating this vicious cycle of silence, and at the end of the day, not allowing for there to be local decision making. And Orange County did request a waiver for the emergency order, so they wouldn't be forced to open up brick and mortar in August, but it was denied. So where we are right now is what you just mentioned, the Launch Ed option. Mm-hmm. And the Launch Ed option is definitely a lot better than Florida Virtual School, because if you sign up for Florida Virtual School, your local districts will not see the per pupil spending. The money will go to virtual school. So these are two separate, you know, institutions completely. If you want to try to maintain your local school unit, but you don't want to go to in classroom settings, and launch ed facilitated by the school district is your best bet. And there are going to be families who still go in person at this point, mostly because they can't not. We have so many families that, whether their kids need more direct attention or they're working parents, there's different reasons why some families they can't um, they don't feel comfortable with in person, but they have no choice. And of course, our teachers are in a very similar situation as well. We have teachers who are immunocompromised, teachers who live with someone who's immunocompromised, and there's just so much anxiety and nervousness, and a lot of questions not answered. I think that's the biggest fear, is that in order to really create a safe educational environment right now, we need more money. We need to pay for PPE. We need to pay for dividers between desks. I mean, there's so much that needs to happen, and it's just moving way too fast. And so, we've been doing our best to push for local options, to support parents and students, teachers, and we did host a virtual town hall about a week and a half ago with the CTA union president Wendy Dormo and school board member Karen Castor Dental from District 6. And next week we're hosting a virtual town hall just for kids. So it's a virtual town hall for kids, by kids, and we want to hear from our little ones and what's on their mind. And so we're looking forward to that as well.
I wish they did that when I was in school. Damn.
Well, and I see a comment, about technology gap, and that's a big deal too. I mean, so many of our kids, they don't have internet, or they don't have strong internet. They don't have computers, and the school district is supposed to provide, at least the tablets. The broadband is a totally different subject, and Department of Education, when the pandemic first started, said they had money available for internet support, but the reality is that we have so many families struggling right now. Our office has been supporting at this point upwards of, I would say, seven families and individuals that live in hotels and motels, like really providing them with a lot of support. And it's just so frustrating because their options are so limited. They live life day by day, and it's very hard to plan if you think you're homeless tomorrow.
Of course, yeah, and with that, isn't because I remember, again, I did school in OCPS. I remember, isn't it like the whole laptop and internet disparity, right? Isn't it, don't some schools offer laptops already? Like, isn't that?
Correct.
So then how do you account for those schools that don't, again, either don't offer laptops or the internet access? What I remember from my interview with Angie was the hotspots. They're creating different hotspots around libraries. Yep. If you can elaborate more on that.
Well, and it's such a great point, because the typical free Wi-Fi applications are not readily available anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like a library. I mean, those are just not as accessible as they once were. And sure. I know I used to volunteer at a private school over in Bithlo years ago, and we had free Wi-Fi in the parking lot, basically. And so a lot of families would apply for jobs and just use this Wi-Fi, by the playground outside. And then, of course, with some of our hotels and motels, we had one situation in Kissimmee, and the power was cut off at this motel. And fortunately, we were able to work with stakeholders and get it turned back on. But for that week, there were students there, and there were children there, but there were also college-age students. I mean, it was a very diverse, age range. But folks would literally go to the Wawa, walk to the gas station and get Wi-Fi, and that's not okay. That's not okay. So, we have to make sure these gaps are covered. And candidly, I actually think Orange County is probably a lot better than some rural parts of the state. If we're going up to the Panhandle, we got parts that have no broadband at all, and so it's even more difficult to expect this to be an easy transition.
Yeah, no, that is fair. And then moving on from that is the one thing that, of course, everybody wants to know is how do teachers, students, parents feel about this? You already talked about you're doing the town hall with kids, which is amazing. I heard you're also doing like a survey, but then there's some faults with that as well. The Orange County survey,
right.
where they're like, what do you want to come back? And so talk to me a little bit more about that, the survey and like some of its flaws or.
So OCPS has been doing a survey, and honestly, I'm not sure if I remember when it opened and the controversy around it, because many folks just every time OCBS does a survey, it can be a little frustrating because it seems like they announce decisions before the survey's even closed. And I think one of the biggest concerns we've heard from teachers in particular is that they don't feel like they're being heard in the process, and they're getting updates from the paper versus, from their supervisors. And that's obviously very frustrating. Teachers need to be engaged in the conversation, their voices need to be prioritized. And that was one of the commitments that school board member Karen Castor Dental gave us during our town hall, was that she was going to be much more intentional in ensuring that the district talks to teachers and lifts up teachers. And one thing that came out of that town hall too was the understanding that the bargaining unit, like when the union bargains with the district, it doesn't actually involve the school board members. It involves staff of the district and the superintendent more than the board members. So also just a reminder for us to hold our board members accountable, of course, but also CC the superintendent, right? There's other folks that are part of the process that you want to make sure hear from you.
Yeah. No, I understand that. And then you mentioned teachers, and they're obviously, and we talked about this a little in our last interview, the importance. How do you make teachers feel safe? Have you seen there's like this Facebook message thing that's going on when it comes to reopening schools, and it's like, essentially different scenarios for teachers, where it's like, all right, hey, if teachers get sick, what happens? And then if substitute comes in, substitute gets sick, what happens? Right? It's like little, instances like that could impact an entire,
that are very real, legitimate questions like, will I get earned sick time if I'm sick, right? Or what happens if a student is positive in my classroom, right? I mean, are you going to make me sign a liability waiver? I mean, there's like so many questions that teachers continue to have. And I know in one of the latest school board meetings, the school board, one of the latest collective bargaining meetings, the teachers union brought forth a list of CDC recommendations. And unfortunately, the district just knocked them all out. And it's like, no, like that's not okay. And so we have to really, I think the best guidelines are CDC guidelines for this. And the teachers union has done a fantastic job in advocating for educators. Their updates are some of the best. And so if folks are not watching CTA on Facebook, like definitely keep in touch with the CTA Orange County, because they are doing an amazing job in sharing updates and really trying to create the best case scenario in one of the worst cases right now.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. But then at the one thing that, at least with me, right, I go to school in Boston, but it's still scary, right? It's been right, for teachers, for students, it's been just just terrifying, I guess, because it's like, the chances of my family members or me getting the virus is increases every year. But the one thing that I find unique though is how we are dealing with this, at least Florida in general is dealing with this, because it kind of exposes our flaws in our education system. Because I keep referencing the interview I have with the school board member, but it's this idea of you mentioned this earlier, funding, right? Whether it's education or whether it's this, but my question for you is, do we have resources? Do we have the funding? Or are we spending it in something else? Like, for instance, like in the United States, when it comes to funding, we spend a lot in defense. Right. This is just, I'm giving an example. But in Florida, is there something that are we spending too much on something, or are we doing something wrong when it comes to our finances?
Totally. I mean, yes, we are. Florida as just a state example. I mentioned earlier that we only allocated $50 million to the bridge loan program to support small businesses. We gave away $543 million to the state's largest corporation. So $500 million to corporations, $50 million to small businesses. I mean, that's like one of the best examples I can give you of just, it's oftentimes a lack of prioritization, not necessarily a lack of money. In the case of the pandemic, I mean, Congress has been a stalemate for about 10 days now over the next relief plan. There seems to be compromise beginning, but you look at the Senate Republican plan, and it's all about protecting big businesses again. It's all about liability for big businesses. And meanwhile, the Democratic package is asking for additional $600 FPUC payments and trying to, really center the conversation on directly impacted people.
People, yeah.
Yeah, and meanwhile, some of these big companies who are getting resources are laying off employees. So it's like, why are we even giving you money if you're laying off people?
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, we definitely need. I think the pandemic calls for more money in general, though. I mean, there's no way for our schools. Our schools have so many unfunded mandates to begin with. For them, this is an unfunded mandate, basically. Like to open in the middle of a pandemic is an unfunded mandate if you don't pay them to do it. And you mentioned, higher educational institutions. There was a great reporting from, I believe, is the Washington Post that dive deep into the health clinics and health centers of higher ed institutions, and it talked about UF and UCF, two Florida examples, but of just how the varying degrees of health services on college campuses and how college campuses have a history of misdiagnosing students, leading to some students being severely ill and unfortunately sometimes dying. And our schools here in Orange County and across the state, not every school even has a school nurse anymore. When I was in school, every school had a school nurse.
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. It's not the case. No, Winter Park raises money through the Winter Park Health Foundation. So I know for our Winter Park school, we typically do have nurses on hand, but it's not the norm across the state. And typically there's like liaisons, if you will, or nurses that travel, but it's not unusual for a school not to have one, a full-time nurse on staff. And so all that needs to change. And we're amplifying disparities that we always knew existed, but it becomes more and more clear during this pandemic.
Okay, I understand. And this is my last question for you. I really appreciate you joining me. This is a very broad question. This is more of like, you can use more I statements and more of a personal piece. But if reelected, right? You're back again. You're back in Tallahassee eventually. What is the and we have to obviously live in a post COVID-19 world,
right?
And so when you walk in Tallahassee, you're like, all right, what is the one thing you're gonna try? Like the most important thing. You can name a couple other things, but the most, you're like, you come in, you're like, I'm going to fight for this. This is the one thing where I'm gonna try to fix this.
It'll be unemployment, hands down. We need to fix the unemployment system. It is a racket. I mean, not only is it just difficult to access, but $275 a week you just can't survive on, and only 12 weeks benefits where the national average is 25 is horrifying. And so we need to fix the unemployment system, and we need to expand Medicaid. We need to make sure people have access to health care. So I would say those are two top priorities. The first moments we're reelected and heading to Tallahassee, but there's obviously so much more to do. And I'm really proud that we can be champions of issues that impact people's lives in every shape and form.
Okay, Rep. And I really appreciate you joining us, and I also really appreciate what you're doing for, again, my county. This is obviously personal. I live here. This is obviously personal to me. And then, again, good luck with the election again in November, and then I hope everything's well with you. And I will phone bank for you eventually. I'm finishing up phone bank for the can.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always fun. But Rep. Anna, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us. And I will post this later, and then if you want, you can post this and make.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Right, thank
you. Thanks to those who joined us, and stay safe out there.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye. Take it easy.